Imagine this. You've spent your whole life striving for a heaven you've never seen, or fearing a hell you can't prove exists. But what if I told you that these ideas of eternal reward and punishment might not be the ultimate truth? What if the lasting peace you're searching for isn't somewhere out there, but already within you, waiting to be uncovered? In this video, we're diving deep into the Buddha's transformative teachings on heaven and hell, not as physical places, but as illusions that shape how we think, act, and suffer. The Buddha's perspective challenges the way we've been taught to view the world, our struggles, and even ourselves. It's not just ancient wisdom. It's a radical way of seeing life that could change how you live, right here and now. By the end of this journey, you'll have a deeper understanding of why the Buddha called heaven and hell mental traps that keep us bound to cycles of craving and fear. And more importantly, you'll gain tools to break free, to discover the kind of freedom that doesn't depend on external rewards or avoiding punishments. So stay tuned, because this might just be the conversation that shifts how you approach everything in your life. From challenges to purpose, from suffering to peace. And as you're watching, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do these ideas challenge what you believe? Do they spark new questions, or inspire you to see things differently? Drop your reflections in the comments below. I can't wait to hear how this exploration resonates with you. Part 1: The Search for Meaning. The story of the Buddha begins with a profound contradiction. Siddhartha Gautama was born into privilege, destined to rule as a king. Yet his life became a relentless search for freedom. Not power, not wealth, but liberation from suffering. His upbringing in a royal palace shielded him from the realities of aging, sickness, and death. Everything around him was carefully curated to maintain an illusion of perfection. But as many of us eventually discover, illusions are fragile things. It wasn't until he ventured outside the palace walls that Siddhartha's carefully constructed world began to crumble. The sights he encountered: a frail old man, a sick individual suffering in pain, a lifeless corpse, and a serene ascetic, shocked him to his core. These were truths he couldn't unsee: the inevitability of aging, the vulnerability of the human body, the certainty of death, and the possibility of something deeper, as represented by the ascetic. These encounters weren't just observations. They were revelations. Siddhartha realized that no amount of wealth or status could protect him, or anyone, from these universal truths. His privileged life suddenly felt hollow. How could he ignore suffering when it was so clearly a fundamental part of existence? For Siddhartha, this realization was a call to action. A historical parallel: Mahatma Gandhi. Consider a historical parallel: Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi, born into privilege and trained as a lawyer in England, could have lived a comfortable, insulated life. But his encounters with systemic injustice, particularly the racial discrimination he faced in South Africa, shook him deeply. These experiences transformed him into a relentless seeker of truth. Someone who couldn't ignore suffering when it was laid bare before him. Like Siddhartha, Gandhi chose to leave comfort behind, in pursuit of something greater. Liberation. Not just for himself but for others. A radical response. Siddhartha's response was radical. He renounced his title, his wealth, and even his family to embark on a spiritual quest. He wasn't searching for a reward in heaven, or trying to avoid punishment in hell. Instead, his goal was to uncover the root cause of suffering, and, more importantly, how to transcend it. He believed that if suffering could be understood, it could also be overcome. The nature of suffering. What Siddhartha discovered was revolutionary. Suffering, he realized, doesn't come from external circumstances alone. It's not handed down by divine judgment, or the result of a cosmic punishment. Suffering arises from within, fueled by our desires, attachments, and ignorance. In other words, it's our clinging, our inability to accept the impermanence of life, that keeps us trapped in cycles of pain. Modern reflection, Albert Einstein. Let's pause here and think about someone like Albert Einstein. Einstein revolutionized the way we understand the universe. But he also had an intuitive grasp of human nature. He once said, "A calm and modest life brings more happiness than the pursuit of success combined with constant restlessness." This echoes the Buddha's insight. Suffering often stems from our endless striving for more. More power, more possessions, more recognition, without recognizing the futility of such pursuits. The problem of attachment, desire, the Buddha taught, isn't inherently bad. It's natural to desire food when you're hungry, or shelter when you're cold. But problems arise when desire becomes attachment. When we cling to things, people, or ideas, as if they're the key to our happiness. This clinging creates a fear of loss, an anxiety about change, and ultimately, suffering. Ignorance and its impact. Ignorance compounds this suffering. It's not just a lack of knowledge, but a deep misunderstanding of reality. We perceive the world through a lens of me and mine, constantly dividing life into what benefits us and what threatens us. This narrow perspective blinds us to the interconnected nature of existence, and keeps us caught in cycles of craving and aversion. Another modern example, Steve Jobs. Here's an example that might resonate. Think of Steve Jobs, the visionary co-founder of Apple. Jobs often spoke about the importance of letting go, famously reflecting on how facing his own mortality shaped his perspective. He once said, "Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose." This aligns with the Buddha's insight that our attachments, whether to material success or our very identity, are often the source of our deepest fears. Liberation from within. The Buddha's realization that suffering is self-created led to an equally powerful conclusion. Liberation must also come from within. This is the heart of his teaching. External circumstances, whether good or bad, can't ultimately free us. True freedom lies in transforming our relationship with desire, attachment, and ignorance. A timeless lesson. In our modern world, this teaching remains as relevant as ever. We live in a culture that constantly dangles rewards in front of us, promising happiness if we can just achieve this goal, buy this product, or win this approval. Yet the Buddha's journey reminds us that chasing external validation is like chasing a mirage. The peace we seek can't be found out there. It's cultivated within. An invitation for courage. By stepping away from his royal life, Siddhartha demonstrated that the search for meaning requires courage. The courage to question assumptions, to face uncomfortable truths, and to let go of what no longer serves us. His story isn't just about one man's spiritual awakening. It's an invitation for all of us to embark on our own journey, asking the fundamental question: what truly matters? Part 2, Heaven and Hell, Stories We Tell Ourselves. The Buddha's perspective on heaven and hell is one of the most profound shifts in religious thought. Unlike many traditions that view these realms as eternal destinations, one a reward for virtuous living, the other a punishment for sin, the Buddha reframed them as temporary states of being. Heaven and hell, he taught, are not places we are sent to by a divine judge, but experiences we create through our thoughts, actions, and mental states. Heaven and hell in everyday life. Imagine this: you've had a moment in your life where everything feels perfect. Perhaps it's the joy of being surrounded by loved ones, the satisfaction of achieving a long-sought goal, or the peace of watching a serene sunset. In these moments, life feels heavenly. Conversely, there are times of intense anger, regret, or despair, where everything feels hopeless, as if you're trapped in a personal hell. These experiences are universal, yet they arise not from an external force, but from our internal state of mind. A psychological parallel, Viktor Frankl. This perspective aligns with modern psychology. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and renowned psychiatrist, wrote in Man's Search for Meaning about how even in the most horrifying conditions of Nazi concentration camps, he observed individuals who maintained a sense of purpose and inner peace. Others, despite having slightly better physical conditions, fell into despair. Frankl's conclusion was that our mental state, not our external circumstances, largely determines our experience of suffering or liberation. This is the essence of the Buddha's teaching on heaven and hell. Heaven and hell as metaphors. In Buddhist philosophy, heaven and hell are metaphors for the mental and emotional states we cultivate through our actions. A life rooted in compassion, generosity, and mindfulness leads to positive states, a kind of heaven. Conversely, a life driven by greed, anger, and ignorance results in suffering, a kind of hell. But here's the key: neither state is permanent. Just as a stormy sky eventually clears, so too do our mental and emotional states shift, based on our choices and perspectives. A historical example, Nelson Mandela. Consider the life of Nelson Mandela. Imprisoned for 27 years under the harshest conditions, Mandela had every reason to fall into a state of hatred and despair, a personal hell. Yet, through deep reflection and a commitment to forgiveness, He cultivated a sense of inner peace and purpose. When he emerged from prison, he wasn't consumed by anger but radiated a kind of serenity that inspired the world. His life is a testament to the Buddha's insight. Heaven and hell are not fixed places, but reflections of our inner world. The dangers of attachment. The Buddha also warned about the dangers of becoming overly attached to the idea of heaven, or overly fearful of hell. Why? Because clinging to these concepts can keep us trapped in cycles of desire and aversion. For instance, the pursuit of heaven can lead to a life consumed by self-righteousness or superficial virtue, doing good not out of genuine compassion, but out of a transactional hope for reward. Similarly, fear of hell can paralyze us, keeping us from living authentically or making necessary mistakes for growth. A modern example, Elon Musk. A modern example might be found in the corporate world. Take someone like Elon Musk. Love him or hate him, Musk exemplifies someone unafraid of failure. He has repeatedly risked everything on ventures like Tesla and SpaceX, while others might be paralyzed by the fear of losing wealth or status, their personal hell. Musk seems to operate with a kind of detachment, focusing instead on long-term goals. This reflects the Buddhist teaching that freedom comes not from chasing heaven or avoiding hell, but from transcending the duality altogether, transforming suffering. The Buddha's teaching challenges us to see heaven and hell not as final judgments but as opportunities for growth. When we find ourselves in a hellish state, perhaps gripped by anger or despair, the Buddhist path offers tools to transform that suffering. Mindfulness allows us to observe our emotions without being consumed by them. Compassion helps us shift our focus from ourselves to others, creating a sense of connection and purpose. Wisdom reminds us that all things, including suffering, are impermanent, clinging to joy. On the other hand, when we experience a heavenly state, the Buddha encouraged us not to cling to it. Why? Because clinging creates a fear of losing it, which ultimately leads to suffering. The joy of the moment can be fully appreciated only when we let go of the need to possess or prolong it. A Zen parable. A famous Zen parable captures this perfectly. A monk walking through the forest encounters a ferocious tiger. He runs and slips off a cliff, grabbing onto a vine to save himself. Above him, the tiger snarls. Below him, sharp rocks await. As he hangs there, he notices a wild strawberry growing on the cliffside. He plucks it and eats it, savoring its sweetness. The story isn't about escaping the tiger or avoiding the fall. It's about appreciating the strawberry, even in the midst of danger. This is what it means to transcend heaven and hell, to live fully in the present moment, unburdened by fear or craving. An invitation to responsibility. The Buddha's radical teaching invites us to take responsibility for our experience. Heaven and hell are not places we're sent to after death, but conditions we create in our lives right now. By cultivating mindfulness, compassion, and wisdom, we can transform even the most challenging circumstances into opportunities for growth. And by letting go of our attachments to pleasure and our aversion to pain, we can discover a freedom that lies beyond these dualities. A practical question. So, the next time you find yourself in a heavenly or hellish state, pause and ask yourself, what thoughts, actions, or attitudes brought me here? And what can I do to create a state of peace and liberation instead? The answer, as the Buddha reminds us, is always within. Part 3, Karma, the law of cause and effect. Karma is one of the most widely misunderstood concepts in Buddhism. Popular culture often simplifies it to a cosmic scoreboard. Do good, and good things will happen to you. Do bad, and you'll be punished. But the Buddha's understanding of karma goes far deeper than this transactional interpretation. It's not about divine judgment or cosmic punishment. It's about understanding the natural law of cause and effect, and how our actions shape not only the world around us, but the fabric of our inner lives. What karma is not. Let's start with what karma is not. In Buddhism, karma isn't some external force keeping track of your deeds. There's no celestial accountant jotting down your sins and virtues. Instead, karma refers to the inherent consequences of our actions, words, and thoughts. Every choice we make creates a ripple that influences both our external circumstances and our inner states. It's like planting seeds. The quality of the seed determines the type of plant that will grow. A historical example, Martin Luther King Jr. Think about the life of Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. King's commitment to nonviolence and justice didn't just inspire civil rights progress. It also shaped the man he became. His actions, rooted in love and compassion, didn't just transform society. They created an internal sense of purpose and dignity that allowed him to persevere even in the face of immense hatred and adversity. His life demonstrates the Buddha's teaching on karma. Our choices shape not only the world, but also the quality of our inner experience. The ripple effect of actions. The Buddha often explained karma using metaphors. Imagine a pot of water into which you drop a pebble. The ripples spread outward, interacting with the surface of the water before returning to the center. Your actions are the pebble, and the ripples are the effects that reverberate through your life and the lives of others. Karma isn't immediate, nor is it always obvious. Sometimes the ripples take years, or even lifetimes, to return. This is why the Buddha emphasized mindfulness and awareness. Without careful observation, it's easy to lose sight of how our choices shape our destiny. A modern example, Oprah Winfrey. Now consider a more modern figure. Someone like Oprah Winfrey. Born into poverty and faced with significant challenges early in life, Oprah made a conscious decision to focus on personal growth, education, and generosity. Her actions didn't just lead to external success. They also cultivated a sense of resilience, compassion, and purpose that continues to inspire millions. Her life serves as a reminder that karma isn't just about the external rewards of good deeds. It's about the internal transformation that occurs when we align our actions with wisdom and compassion. Misunderstanding karma. The Buddha also warned about the dangers of misunderstanding karma. Some people see it as a justification for suffering. If someone is poor or sick, It's because they've done something wrong in a past life. But this interpretation is both simplistic and harmful. The Buddha taught that karma is just one factor among many that shape our experiences. Environmental circumstances, social conditions, and even chance play a role in the challenges we face. Karma isn't about blame, it's about responsibility. It invites us to ask, what seeds am I planting right now? And how will they shape my future? A historical example, Mahatma Gandhi. A great example of this can be found in the life of Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi believed deeply in the power of nonviolent resistance. Not just as a tactic but as a moral principle. He understood that violent actions, even if they achieve a short-term goal, create ripples of fear and hatred that ultimately lead to more suffering. By contrast, his commitment to nonviolence created a different kind of ripple. One that inspired millions and laid the groundwork for lasting change. Gandhi's life demonstrates the Buddha's teaching that skillful actions, those rooted in compassion, patience, and wisdom, create conditions for peace and liberation. The role of intention. Karma also extends to our thoughts and intentions, not just our outward actions. This is one of the most profound aspects of the teaching. Imagine someone who performs a charitable act, but does so with selfish motives, hoping to gain recognition or social status. While the outward action may appear good, the intention behind it creates a different kind of ripple. One that reinforces attachment and ego. The Buddha taught that true liberation comes when our actions are not just skillful, but also motivated by selflessness and clarity. Forgiveness and reconciliation, Nelson Mandela. Let's take this a step further. Think of Nelson Mandela, who emerged from 27 years in prison, without bitterness or a desire for revenge. His thoughts, shaped by years of reflection, were rooted in forgiveness and reconciliation. These intentions, combined with his actions, created ripples that not only healed a nation, but also left an enduring legacy of peace. Mandela's example underscores the Buddha's insight. Karma isn't just about what we do. It's about why and how we do it. The transformative power of karma. The transformative power of karma lies in its immediacy. While its effects may take time to unfold fully, the act of choosing skillful actions in the present moment begins to shape our inner world immediately. The Buddha often said, "With our thoughts, we make the world." When we choose kindness over anger, patience over frustration, or generosity over greed, we begin to experience the benefits of those choices in our own minds and hearts, even before the external ripples return. Karma and interconnectedness. Finally, karma reminds us of our interconnectedness. Every action we take impacts others, just as their actions impact us. This is why the Buddha emphasized compassion. When we act with the well-being of others in mind, we not only create positive ripples in their lives, but also cultivate peace within ourselves. It's a feedback loop of goodness that benefits everyone. A practical reflection. So, what does this mean for us today? It means that we hold incredible power in each moment. The choices we make, no matter how small, are the seeds we plant for the future. By cultivating mindfulness, compassion, and wisdom, we can begin to shape a life of peace and purpose, one ripple at a time. And in doing so, we come to realize the profound truth of the Buddha's teaching. Our liberation is in our own hands. Part 4: The Illusion of the Self. One of the most revolutionary aspects of the Buddha's teachings is the concept of anatta, or non-self. It's a teaching that challenges one of our most deeply ingrained beliefs: the idea that we have a fixed, unchanging essence, a soul or a self that defines who we are. According to the Buddha, this notion of a permanent self is not only an illusion but also one of the primary causes of our suffering. The burden of me and mine. Think about it. We spend our lives building, protecting, and clinging to this idea of me and mine. We identify with our achievements, possessions, relationships, and even our bodies. But what happens when these things change? As they inevitably do, we suffer. Because we've tied our sense of identity to something impermanent. A metaphor, the chariot. To understand the Buddha's teaching, let's use a metaphor. Imagine a chariot. It's made up of parts, wheels, a frame, an axle, and so on. If you take away the wheels, is it still a chariot? If you remove the frame or the axle, does the chariot still exist? The chariot isn't a single, unchanging thing. It's simply a convenient label for a collection of parts working together temporarily. In the same way, what we call the self is just a collection of ever-changing components. Our thoughts, emotions, physical sensations, and experiences. Freedom through letting go. This idea might sound unsettling at first, but it's incredibly liberating. If there's no fixed self, then who is there to suffer? Who is there to fear death or cling to possessions? By letting go of the illusion of a permanent self, we also let go of the attachments and aversions that cause so much of our suffering. A historical example: Harriet Tubman. Consider the life of Harriet Tubman. Tubman didn't cling to an identity rooted in her suffering as an enslaved person. Instead, she transcended her personal circumstances, dedicating her life to helping others escape to freedom. Her sense of purpose wasn't tied to protecting a fragile ego. It was rooted in selflessness and compassion. This is what the Buddha's teaching on anatta invites us to do. To see beyond the narrow confines of I and mine, and connect with something larger. Observing the self through meditation. The Buddha often illustrated the illusion of self through meditation. When we sit quietly and observe our minds, we begin to notice how thoughts and emotions arise and pass away. They don't belong to us, they're not permanent. One moment we're happy, the next we're sad. One moment we're angry, the next we're calm. If these mental states are constantly changing, how can they define who we are? Modern reflection: Steve Jobs. Think about someone like Steve Jobs. Despite his significant accomplishments, Jobs was known for his ability to think beyond his ego. He once said, "Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap." of thinking you have something to lose. Jobs understood that clinging to a fixed sense of self, or the fear of losing it, limits our potential. Instead, he focused on creating and contributing, knowing that his identity wasn't tied to any one success or failure. Non-self in relationships. The teaching of non-self also transforms how we view relationships. Much of our suffering in relationships comes from our expectations. We want people to behave a certain way, or fulfill specific roles because it reinforces our sense of self. But when we let go of this attachment, we open the door to genuine connection. Instead of seeing others as extensions of ourselves, we begin to appreciate them for who they truly are. A legacy of reconciliation, Nelson Mandela. Take someone like Nelson Mandela. After spending 27 years in prison, Mandela could have clung to a narrative of victimhood or revenge. Instead, he chose reconciliation. He let go of the ego-driven need to prove himself right, or to punish his oppressors. This ability to transcend the self allowed him to unite a fractured nation and leave a legacy of peace. Non-self and death. The Buddha's teaching on anatta also challenges our fear of death. If there's no fixed self, then what is there to fear? Death becomes not an end but a transformation, a natural part of the cycle of existence. Imagine a wave in the ocean. When the wave crashes, it doesn't cease to exist. It simply returns to the ocean. In the same way, the components that make up our self dissolve and continue in new forms. By letting go of the illusion of a permanent self, we can approach death with peace rather than fear, living beyond the self. This teaching has profound implications for how we live our lives. If we're not defined by a fixed self, then we're free to change, grow, and adapt. We're not bound by past mistakes or limitations. Each moment becomes an opportunity to create something new. A practical reflection. Here's a practical way to explore this idea in your own life. The next time you're caught up in a strong emotion, anger, jealousy, or fear, pause and observe it. Notice how it arises, peaks, and eventually fades away. Ask yourself, who is angry? Who is jealous? Is this emotion a permanent part of me? Or is it just a passing wave? This practice helps us loosen the grip of the ego and see our experiences for what they are, temporary phenomena. An invitation to freedom. The illusion of self is one of the most challenging teachings in Buddhism, but it's also one of the most liberating. By letting go of the idea that we're a fixed, unchanging entity, we free ourselves from many of the fears and attachments that cause suffering. We realize that we're not separate from the world. We're part of its constant flow, interconnected with everything around us. A final question. So, the next time you find yourself clinging to an identity, a possession, or an expectation, take a moment to ask, what am I really holding on to? And what would it feel like to let it go? The answer might just set you free. Part 5. Rebirth without reincarnation. Rebirth is one of the most fascinating and misunderstood concepts in Buddhism. Many people assume it's similar to the idea of reincarnation found in other traditions. A soul traveling from one life to the next. But the Buddha's teaching on rebirth is far more nuanced and revolutionary. In fact, it directly challenges the notion of a permanent soul, which is central to reincarnation. Instead, Buddhism views rebirth as a continuation of actions and energy, not the movement of a fixed self. The link to non-self, anatta. To understand this, let's revisit the Buddha's teaching on anatta, or non-self. According to the Buddha, what we think of as I is not a solid, unchanging essence. It's a collection of ever-shifting components, thoughts, feelings, perceptions, and actions. If there's no permanent self, then what is reborn? The answer lies in the law of karma. Just as a flame lights another flame, the energy of our actions, our karma, creates the conditions for future existence. There's continuity, but no unchanging identity. A metaphor, seeds and trees. Let's break this down with a metaphor. Imagine planting a seed. That seed grows into a tree, which produces more seeds. The new seeds are connected to the original tree, but they're not the same tree. In the same way, our actions in this life plant the seeds for the conditions of the next. Even though there's no fixed self moving from one life to the next. A historical parallel, Isaac Newton. A historical parallel can be seen in the life of Isaac Newton. Newton famously said, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." His discoveries were not created in isolation. They were the result of countless contributions from those who came before him. Similarly, our actions and intentions ripple forward, shaping future circumstances. Even though the individual components may change, the practical implications. Rebirth without a soul might sound abstract, but its implications are deeply practical. It shifts the focus from what happens to me after I die to what am I creating right now. The Buddha taught that the energy we put into the world, through our actions, words, and thoughts, has consequences that extend beyond our current life. This perspective encourages responsibility and mindfulness in every moment. A modern example, Rosa Parks. Consider someone like Rosa Parks. When Parks refused to give up her seat on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama, her actions sparked a movement that transformed the civil rights landscape in America. Her courage and resolve didn't just impact her own life. They created ripples that continue to inspire generations. This is karma and rebirth in action. The energy of her choices lived on, shaping the conditions of the future. Even though she herself was not physically present to see all the changes unfold. Rebirth as empowerment. The Buddha's teaching on rebirth also reframes how we think about suffering and growth. Often, we view challenges as burdens to be avoided. But in Buddhism, every experience, whether joyful or painful, is an opportunity to plant seeds for future liberation. If our current circumstances are the result of past actions, then our present actions hold the key to transforming those circumstances. This isn't about blame or guilt, it's about empowerment. A powerful example, Malala Yousafzai. A striking example can be found in the life of Malala Yousafzai. Shot by the Taliban for advocating for girls' education, Malala didn't allow her suffering to define her. Instead, She transformed that experience into a source of strength, becoming a global advocate for education and peace. Her actions demonstrate the Buddhist principle that even in the face of immense hardship, we can choose to respond in ways that create positive ripples for the future. The interconnectedness of life. Rebirth without reincarnation also encourages us to see the interconnectedness of life. If there's no permanent self, then the boundaries between me and others start to blur. My actions don't just affect my future. They shape the world we all share. This understanding leads naturally to compassion. When we recognize that our choices contribute to the conditions others will experience, we're more likely to act with kindness and wisdom. An environmental legacy, Rachel Carson. A beautiful illustration of this interconnectedness comes from the story of Rachel Carson, the environmentalist and author of Silent Spring. Carson's work sparked the modern environmental movement, influencing policies and inspiring countless activists. She didn't live to see the full impact of her efforts, but her actions planted seeds that continue to grow. Her life reminds us that what we do today matters, not just for us but for the generations to come. Rebirth and death. The concept of rebirth also challenges our fear of death. If there's no permanent self, then death isn't the annihilation of me. It's a transition, a continuation of the energy we've cultivated. Imagine a wave in the ocean. When the wave crashes, it doesn't disappear. It becomes part of the ocean again, contributing to new waves. In the same way, our actions, thoughts, and intentions continue, shaping new conditions. Living in the present. This perspective transforms how we live. Instead of obsessing over what happens after we die, we focus on how we're living right now. Are we planting seeds of kindness, generosity, and wisdom? Or are we sowing the seeds of anger, greed, and ignorance? The Buddha's teaching on rebirth isn't about speculation. It's an invitation to live with purpose and mindfulness. A practical reflection. Here's a simple way to apply this teaching in your own life. The next time you're faced with a decision, pause and ask yourself, what seeds am I planting with this action? How will this choice shape the future? This practice helps us align our actions with the qualities we want to cultivate in ourselves and the world. The invitation of rebirth. The Buddha's teaching on rebirth without reincarnation is a profound reminder of our interconnectedness and our power to shape the future. By understanding that our actions have far-reaching consequences, we can live with greater responsibility, compassion, and purpose. And by letting go of the illusion of a permanent self, we free ourselves to fully embrace the flow of life, knowing that the energy we create today will continue to ripple forward, shaping a future we may never see but will always be a part of. Part 6. Transcending Heaven and Hell. The Buddha's teachings about transcending heaven and hell are among his most radical and transformative ideas. They challenge the way we think about morality, spirituality, and the very structure of life itself. In many religious traditions, heaven and hell are seen as ultimate destinations, a reward or punishment determined by divine judgment. But the Buddha dismantled this notion, suggesting that clinging to the duality of heaven and hell only binds us further in cycles of suffering. Heaven and hell as states of mind. To the Buddha, heaven and hell are not external places, but mental and emotional states we create through our actions, intentions, and perceptions. They're not eternal prisons or paradises, but impermanent conditions that reflect the quality of our minds. This perspective shifts the focus from what happens after we die to how we're living right now. A historical example, Mahatma Gandhi. Let's illustrate this with an example from history, Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi's commitment to nonviolence, even in the face of brutal oppression, created a sense of inner peace and purpose that transcended his external circumstances. For him, the struggle for justice wasn't about seeking a heavenly reward or avoiding punishment. It was about living in alignment with truth and compassion. Contrast this with someone driven by greed or anger, who may achieve material success, but live in a state of inner turmoil, a personal hell of their own making. The trap of duality. The Buddha taught that clinging to the idea of heaven or fearing hell traps us in a dualistic mindset. We become obsessed with pursuing pleasure and avoiding pain, constantly chasing rewards or running from punishments. This cycle, known as samsara, keeps us bound to suffering. True liberation, the Buddha explained, comes when we transcend these opposites and realize the impermanent nature of all things. A lesson from Viktor Frankl. Consider the life of Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor and author of Man's Search for Meaning. Even in the horrors of a concentration camp, a literal hell on earth, Frankl found meaning by focusing on his inner freedom. He realized that while he couldn't control his external circumstances, he could choose how to respond to them. This echoes the Buddha's teaching. Heaven and hell are not imposed upon us. They are conditions we create through our own choices and perspectives. Desire and aversion. The Buddha's emphasis on transcending heaven and hell is closely tied to his teaching on desire and aversion. Heaven represents the things we crave: pleasure, comfort, recognition. Hell symbolizes the things we fear: pain, loss, humiliation. By clinging to one and avoiding the other, we reinforce the very attachments that keep us suffering. Liberation isn't about escaping to a better place. It's about breaking free from the cycle of craving and fear altogether. A Zen story. This idea is beautifully captured in the story of the Zen master, who was asked, "What happens after we die? Do we go to heaven or hell?" The master replied, "Why are you so worried about what happens after death? Focus on how you're living right now." This response reflects the Buddha's wisdom. The way to transcend heaven and hell is not to obsess over them, but to live mindfully in the present, free from attachment and aversion. A modern example, the Dalai Lama. A modern example of this can be seen in the life of the Dalai Lama. Despite losing his homeland and witnessing the suffering of his people, the Dalai Lama radiates peace and compassion. He doesn't view his exile as a punishment or seek a reward for his patience. Instead, he focuses on cultivating inner freedom and helping others do the same. His life demonstrates the Buddha's teaching that liberation is not about changing our external circumstances, but transforming our inner world. The impermanence of heaven and hell. The Buddha also emphasized that heaven and hell are temporary. Just as a storm eventually passes, so too do our mental and emotional states. When we're in a hellish state, overwhelmed by anger, fear, or despair, it's easy to feel like it will last forever. But the Buddha reminds us that all things, including suffering, are impermanent. This understanding helps us face challenges with patience and resilience, knowing that they will pass. Clinging to joy. On the other hand, when we're in a heavenly state, experiencing joy, success, or contentment, the Buddha cautioned against clinging to it. Why? Because clinging creates a fear of losing it, which leads to suffering. By recognizing the impermanence of both pleasure and pain, we can appreciate the present moment, without becoming attached to it. Transforming the mind. This teaching has profound implications for how we live our lives. If heaven and hell are not fixed destinations, but reflections of our mental states, then the path to liberation lies in transforming our minds. Through mindfulness, we can observe our thoughts and emotions, without being controlled by them. Through compassion, we can shift our focus from self-centered desires to the well-being of others. Through wisdom, we can see beyond the illusions of reward and punishment to the deeper truth of interconnectedness and impermanence. A legacy of courage. Harriet Tubman. Consider someone like Harriet Tubman, who risked her life repeatedly to free others from slavery. Tubman's actions weren't motivated by fear of hell or a desire for heavenly reward. They were rooted in compassion and a deep sense of purpose. Her courage and selflessness transcended the duality of heaven and hell, creating a legacy that continues to inspire. An invitation to liberation. This is the essence of the Buddha's teaching. Heaven and hell are not places we go to after we die. They are conditions we create in the present moment. By letting go of attachment and aversion, we free ourselves to live fully and authentically, guided by wisdom and compassion. A practical reflection. The next time you find yourself caught in a hellish state, whether it's anger, fear, or despair, pause and ask, what am I clinging to? What am I resisting? And what would it feel like to let it go? Similarly, when you experience a heavenly moment of joy or success, savor it without grasping at it. Remember that all things are impermanent, and true freedom lies not in holding on but in letting go. The path to nirvana. The Buddha's teaching on transcending heaven and hell invites us to step beyond the dualities that bind us and discover a deeper, more lasting freedom. It's not about escaping life's challenges, but transforming how we relate to them, moment by moment. And in doing so, we begin to glimpse the peace and liberation that the Buddha called nirvana. Part 7. Freedom beyond heaven and hell. The Buddha's teachings about freedom transcend the traditional framework of reward and punishment. While many religious traditions emphasize striving for heaven or avoiding hell, the Buddha invites us to step beyond these dualities. His path isn't about achieving external destinations. It's about discovering an inner liberation that goes beyond the cycles of craving, fear, and suffering. Nirvana, freedom beyond illusion. This idea is rooted in the concept of nirvana, which the Buddha described as the ultimate state of freedom and peace. Nirvana isn't a place or a reward. It's a profound shift in perception. It's the realization that the world we experience, shaped by our desires and aversions, is not the ultimate reality. When we let go of clinging to what we want and resisting what we fear, we begin to see life as it truly is, interconnected, impermanent, and boundless. A historical example, Nelson Mandela. A striking example of this comes from Nelson Mandela. After spending 27 years in prison, Mandela emerged not with bitterness or a desire for revenge, but with a deep sense of purpose and reconciliation. His ability to let go of anger and resentment exemplifies the freedom the Buddha spoke of. Freedom not from external conditions, but from the internal chains of hatred and attachment. Mandela's forgiveness and compassion were a form of nirvana in action, breaking the cycle of fear and retribution that could have consumed him. Nirvana versus samsara. The Buddha often explained the concept of nirvana by contrasting it with samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth fueled by desire and ignorance. Samsara is the state of being trapped in a constant loop of seeking pleasure and avoiding pain, always chasing something or running from something else. Nirvana, by contrast, is the stillness that comes from letting go of this endless chase. It's not about escaping life but fully embracing it, free from the illusions that cause suffering. A Life of Purpose, Harriet Beecher Stowe. Consider the story of Harriet Beecher Stowe, the author of Uncle Tom's Cabin. Stowe wrote her novel during a time of immense social and political tension, using her words to shine a light on the horrors of slavery. She wasn't motivated by a fear of hell or a hope for heavenly reward, but by a deep sense of moral clarity and compassion. Her work created ripples that contributed to the abolitionist movement, changing the course of history. This kind of purpose-driven action reflects the Buddha's teaching. Freedom isn't about personal gain. It's about living in alignment with truth and love. Mindfulness, the first step to freedom. The Buddha also taught that the path to freedom begins with mindfulness. By paying attention to our thoughts, emotions, and actions, we can begin to see how they shape our experience. When we're caught in anger or desire, it's like being in a fog. Our vision is clouded, and we act out of habit rather than awareness. Mindfulness clears the fog, allowing us to respond to life's challenges with wisdom and compassion, rather than reactivity. A modern example, Thich Nhat Hanh. A modern example of this can be found in the life of Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Zen master and peace activist. Thich Nhat Hanh faced immense suffering during the Vietnam War. Yet he dedicated his life to cultivating mindfulness and teaching others to do the same. He famously said, "Peace is every step." This simple phrase encapsulates the Buddha's teaching. Freedom isn't something we achieve in the future. It's something we cultivate moment by moment, through awareness and presence. Letting go of identity. The Buddha's teaching on freedom also challenges our attachment to identity. Many of us define ourselves by our roles, achievements, or possessions. But these things are impermanent, and clinging to them only causes suffering. True freedom comes from realizing that we're not defined by what we have or what we've done. We're not a fixed self, but a dynamic, ever-changing process. Like a river constantly flowing and reshaping itself. A legacy of curiosity, Marie Curie. Think of someone like Marie Curie. Curie's life was defined not by her titles or awards, but by her relentless curiosity and dedication to science. Even in the face of personal tragedy and health challenges caused by her work, she continued to contribute to humanity's understanding of the natural world. Her ability to transcend personal suffering and focus on her purpose reflects the Buddha's teaching. Freedom is about aligning our actions with something greater than ourselves. Compassion as a gateway to freedom. The Buddha also emphasized the importance of compassion on the path to freedom. Compassion isn't just about helping others. It's a way of breaking down the barriers that separate us from the world. When we act with compassion, we stop seeing others as them and start recognizing our shared humanity. This shift in perspective is liberating because it dissolves the boundaries of ego and self-interest, allowing us to experience the interconnectedness of all life. A life of service, Mother Teresa. Consider the life of Mother Teresa. Her work with the poor and dying in Kolkata wasn't about seeking personal happiness or heavenly reward. It was an expression of unconditional love and service. Her compassion allowed her to transcend the physical suffering around her, creating a sense of peace and purpose, even in the most challenging circumstances. Letting go of fear. Finally, the Buddha's teaching on freedom invites us to let go of fear. Much of our suffering comes from fearing loss. Loss of status, relationships, possessions, or even life itself. But when we realize that everything is impermanent, including ourselves, we begin to see that clinging to anything is futile. Letting go of fear doesn't mean becoming indifferent. It means embracing life fully, knowing that every moment is precious precisely because it's fleeting. A legacy of courage, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. A powerful example of this can be found in the life of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a German theologian and anti-Nazi dissident. Bonhoeffer faced imprisonment and eventual execution with remarkable courage, writing letters that reflected a deep sense of peace and purpose. His writings demonstrate the freedom that comes from letting go of fear and living in alignment with one's values, even in the face of death. An invitation to nirvana. The Buddha's teachings on freedom remind us that heaven and hell are not places we go to after we die. They're states of mind we create through our actions, thoughts, and perceptions. True freedom comes from transcending the dualities of reward and punishment, pleasure and pain, and self and other. It's about living with mindfulness, compassion, and wisdom, moment by moment. A practical reflection. The next time you find yourself caught in a cycle of craving or fear, pause and ask, what am I holding on to? What would it feel like to let it go? By practicing this kind of awareness, we take the first steps toward the freedom the Buddha spoke of. Freedom not from life but within it. The essence of nirvana. This is the essence of nirvana. Not an escape but a profound embrace of the truth. It's the realization that freedom isn't found in avoiding challenges or chasing rewards. It's found in letting go of illusions and living fully in the present moment. So, what do you think? The Buddha's teachings remind us that the real journey isn't about chasing a distant paradise or avoiding eternal suffering. It's about transforming how we experience life, right here and now. Heaven and hell aren't destinations. They're states of mind we create with every thought, every action, and every moment of awareness. Now it's your turn. How can you begin to shift your perspective? What attachments are holding you back? And what would it feel like to let them go? Let's start a conversation. Drop your thoughts, questions, or even your doubts in the comments below. I'll be reading, and I'm genuinely excited to hear your perspective. If this exploration resonated with you, please give this video a like. It helps the channel grow and reach more people seeking deeper meaning in their lives. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you never miss a chance to dive into life's most profound questions with us. Thank you for watching, for reflecting, and for being part of this incredible community. Until next time, may you find peace and freedom in every step of your journey.